France just announced something that shocked economists around the world. The country that gave us luxury fashion, fine wine, and the Eiffel Tower is facing an economic crisis that most people have no idea about. Right now, French citizens are paying more in taxes than almost anyone else on the planet. Yet their government is drowning in debt and public services are falling apart. But here's what nobody is telling you about what's really happening behind the scenes. There's a secret financial time bomb that's been ticking for decades, and when it explodes, it won't just hurt France. It will send shockwaves through every major economy in the world, including yours. The truth about what's coming will change everything you think you know about European wealth and stability. Let me take you back to a moment that changed France forever. It's 1945, and the country is rebuilding after World War II. The government makes a promise to its people. Everyone will have healthcare, everyone will have a pension, and the state will protect you from cradle to grave. It sounds beautiful, right? This is the birth of the French social model, and for a while, it worked like magic. The economy boomed, factories hummed, and French families enjoyed a quality of life that became the envy of Europe. Fast forward to today, and that same promise is crushing the nation under its own weight. Walk through Paris right now, and you'll see two completely different cities. On one side, tourists snap photos of pristine monuments and sip espresso at sidewalk cafes that cost 20 euros. On the other side, French workers are protesting in the streets almost every single week. They're angry, they're tired, and they're watching their paychecks disappear into a system that keeps demanding more while giving back less. The average French worker pays about 47% of their income in taxes and social contributions. That's nearly half of everything they earn, gone before they even see it. To put that in perspective, the average American pays around 24%. French workers are literally giving up twice as much of their money to the government. But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite collecting all this money, France is broke. The national debt is sitting at about 112% of GDP. That means the country owes more money than its entire economy produces in a year. It's like making $50,000 but owing $56,000 on your credit cards. And the debt keeps growing. Every single year, France spends way more than it takes in. In 2023 alone, the budget deficit hit 154 billion euros. That's the gap between what they collected and what they spent, and somebody has to pay for that gap eventually. Now you might be thinking, okay, but France is still rich, right? They have all those famous companies and luxury brands. Here's the reality check. The unemployment rate in France hovers around 7%, which is higher than most of its neighbors. Youth unemployment is even worse, sitting above 17%. That means nearly 1 in 5 young French people can't find work. These aren't lazy kids sitting at home. These are educated young adults with degrees who can't break into a job market that is frozen solid by rigid labor laws and sky-high costs for employers. Let me explain how France got into this mess. It all comes back to that promise from 1945. The government built a massive welfare state with pensions, healthcare, unemployment benefits, and subsidies for everything from farming to film production. When the economy was growing fast and the population was young, this system worked. Lots of workers paying in, fewer retirees taking out. But then something happened that nobody planned for. People started living longer, way longer. In 1950, the average French person lived to about 66 years old. Today, it's over 82 years. That's an extra 16 years of pension payments and healthcare costs for every single person. At the same time, French families stopped having as many babies. The birth rate dropped from over 3 children per woman in 1950 to around 1.8 today. Do the math on this. Fewer workers paying into the system, more retirees taking money out, and everyone living longer. It's a demographic disaster unfolding in slow motion. By 2050, France will have only 1.5 workers for every retiree. Right now, it's about 2.1 workers per retiree, and the system is already cracking under the pressure. The pension system alone is a financial nightmare. French workers can retire at 64 and collect benefits for decades. The government tried to raise the retirement age to 64 from 62 last year, and the entire country erupted in protests. Millions of people flooded the streets. Garbage piled up in Paris. Trains stopped running. President Macron pushed the change through anyway because he had no choice. The math simply doesn't work anymore. Without that change, the pension system would collapse within 20 years. But even with the change, it's only buying time. The real problem is much deeper. France has something called structural rigidity in its economy. This is a fancy way of saying the system is stuck and can't adapt. Labor laws make it incredibly expensive and difficult to hire and fire workers. Companies have to pay massive social charges on top of salaries. If you want to hire someone for a €40,000 salary, you might actually pay €60,000 once you add all the employer contributions. This makes French businesses less competitive than companies in other countries. Why would a global corporation expand in France when they could go to Germany, the Netherlands, or Ireland and pay much less for the same talent? Here's something that blew my mind when I learned it. France spends about 32% of its entire GDP on social programs. That's the highest in the developed world. Sweden, which everyone thinks of as the ultimate welfare state, spends about 27%. The United States spends roughly 19%. France is in a category all by itself, pouring money into social programs at a rate that's simply unsustainable. And what's crazy is that despite spending all this money, French people aren't necessarily happier or better off than people in countries that spend less. The healthcare system is a perfect example. Yes, French healthcare is excellent if you can access it. But waiting times for specialists are growing longer. Hospitals in rural areas are closing down because there's no money to keep them open. Doctors are leaving France to work in other countries where they can earn more and deal with less bureaucracy. The system is starting to crack, and everyone can see it happening. Yet any politician who suggests real reform gets destroyed in the polls. The French public wants the benefits but doesn't want to face the reality of who's going to pay for them. Let's talk about taxes for a minute because this is where things get really wild. France has a top income tax rate of 45%, but that's just the beginning. There's also a wealth tax on assets, a social security tax, a TV license fee, property taxes, and a VAT sales tax of 20% on most goods. When you add everything together, high earners in France can pay over 60% of their income in various taxes. That's insane. It means if you're a successful entrepreneur or business owner, you work more than half the year just to pay the government. What happens when you tax people this heavily? They leave. France has seen a massive brain drain over the past 2 decades. Successful entrepreneurs, tech workers, doctors, and business leaders are packing up and moving to London, Dubai, Singapore, or the United States. In 2022 alone, over 8,000 millionaires left France. These are exactly the people whose taxes fund the entire system. When they leave, the tax burden falls even harder on the middle-class workers who can't afford to move. It's a vicious cycle that's accelerating every year. The business environment in France is suffocating under regulations. It takes an average of 24 days to start a business in France, compared to just 4 days in the United States. There are rules for everything. How many hours employees can work, when shops can be open, what size packages products can come in, how much vacation time everyone gets. Some of these rules make sense for protecting workers. But taken together, they create an environment where starting and growing a business feels like wading through concrete. Young French entrepreneurs often choose to launch their startups in other countries where the path is clearer. Here's the part that should terrify everyone. France isn't alone in this crisis. Italy, Spain, Greece, and Portugal are all facing similar problems with aging populations, massive debts, and unsustainable social programs. These countries are all part of the Eurozone, which means they share the same currency. If France's economy collapses, it could trigger a domino effect across Europe. And unlike Greece, which was small enough to bail out, France is the second largest economy in Europe. There's no rescue package big enough to save France if things really fall apart. The European Central Bank has been keeping this whole system afloat by keeping interest rates low and buying government bonds. Basically, they're printing money to help countries like France pay their bills. But this can't go on forever. Inflation is already a major problem across Europe. Eventually, interest rates will have to rise, and when they do, countries with massive debts like France will face a reckoning. The cost of borrowing will skyrocket, and governments will have to make brutal choices between cutting spending or defaulting on their debts. Let me paint you a picture of what daily life looks like for regular French people right now. Mary is a 35-year-old teacher in Lyon. She makes about €32,000 a year, which sounds decent. But after taxes and social contributions, she takes home around €24,000. Her rent for a small one-bedroom apartment is €850 a month. That's over €10,000 a year, nearly half her take-home pay just for housing. She pays 20% VAT on almost everything she buys. Her gas is taxed heavily. Even her electricity bill includes multiple taxes. By the time she pays for food, transportation, and basic necessities, there's almost nothing left for savings or entertainment. And she's one of the lucky ones with a stable job and decent benefits. Now think about young people trying to enter this system. Jacques is 24 and just graduated with a degree in engineering. He's been looking for work for 6 months. Companies are hesitant to hire young workers because the labor protections make it almost impossible to fire someone if things don't work out. So businesses only hire when they're absolutely certain they need someone long-term. Jacques is stuck in a catch-22. He needs experience to get hired, but he can't get experience because no one will hire him. Meanwhile, he's watching his friends who move to Germany or the Netherlands land jobs within weeks. The French system is failing its young people, and they know it. The real estate market in France shows another layer of this crisis. Property prices in major cities have skyrocketed, but unlike in other countries, wages haven't kept pace. In Paris, the average apartment costs over 10,000 euros per square meter. A modest 50 square meter apartment runs €500,000. Meanwhile, the median salary in Paris is around 38,000 euros before taxes. Even with 2 incomes, young families can't afford to buy homes in the cities where the jobs are. They're forced to move further out, commuting hours each day, or staying in the rental market forever. French companies are struggling too. Look at what happened to some of France's biggest names. Carrefour, the retail giant, has been closing stores and cutting jobs. Air France has been through multiple restructurings. Even luxury brands like LVMH are moving more of their production outside France to cut costs. The companies that stay in France do so because of brand heritage or because they re-locked in by regulations. But many are quietly shifting operations to other countries where they can operate more efficiently. This means fewer jobs for French workers and less tax revenue for the government. Another vicious cycle. Energy costs are crushing French households right now. France produces a lot of nuclear power, which should make electricity cheap. But the government has loaded so many taxes and fees onto energy bills that French consumers pay some of the highest rates in Europe. The average French household now spends over 2,000 euros a year on electricity and gas. That's up from about 1,400 euros just 5 years ago. When energy costs rise this fast, it squeezes household budgets and forces people to cut back on other spending. This slows down the entire economy because consumer spending drives growth. Food prices are another shock hitting French families. France is famous for its food culture, but grocery bills are climbing fast. The average family now spends about 400 euros a month on food, up from 320 euros in 2019. Part of this is global inflation, but part of it is also France's complex system of agricultural subsidies and regulations that keep prices artificially high. French farmers are protected by government policies that shield them from foreign competition. This helps French farmers survive, but it means French consumers pay more for bread, cheese, meat, and vegetables than people in neighboring countries. Transportation costs add another burden. Gas in France costs about 1.90 euros per liter, which works out to over 7 euros per gallon. About 60% of that price is taxes. The government justifies this by saying it's fighting climate change and funding road maintenance. But for workers who have to drive to their jobs, it's a massive expense that eats into their budgets every month. Public transportation is better in cities, but even that's becoming more expensive as operators struggle with their own funding problems. The healthcare system that France is so proud of is showing serious cracks. Yes, most care is covered by the national insurance system, but waiting times are getting longer. Need to see a dermatologist? You might wait 4 months for an appointment in Paris. Need an MRI? Could be weeks or even months depending on where you live. Dentists and ophthalmologists often charge fees above what the national insurance covers, forcing patients to pay out of pocket or buy private supplemental insurance. The system is still better than many countries, but it's declining from its peak, and everyone knows it. Education is free in France, which sounds great. But the quality varies wildly depending on where you live. Schools in wealthy areas get more resources through parent associations and local funding. Schools in poor areas struggle with overcrowded classrooms, outdated materials, and teachers who are burned out. French students used to score near the top in international education rankings. Now they're solidly in the middle, behind countries like Estonia and Poland that spend far less per student. The system is producing graduates who aren't prepared for the modern job market, which feeds back into the unemployment problem. Small businesses in France are dying off at an alarming rate. The bakery, the cafe, the local shop. These are the backbone of French culture, but they're disappearing. Why? Because the costs of running a small business in France are astronomical. Employers pay huge social charges. Rent is expensive, regulations are complex and constantly changing. Many small business owners work brutal hours just to break even. When they retire, their kids don't want to take over because they've watched their parents struggle. So the shops close and chain stores or online retailers take their place. France is losing the very thing that makes it special. Here's something most people don't realize. France's problems are actually making other European countries nervous. Germany looks at France and sees a warning sign. If France can't fix its finances, it could drag down the entire euro currency. A weak euro hurts everyone in the Eurozone by making imports more expensive and reducing purchasing power. Germany has been the economic engine of Europe for decades. But even Germany can't carry the weight of multiple failing economies. The whole European project, which was supposed to unite the continent and create prosperity, is at risk if major countries like France can't get their economies under control. The political situation makes everything worse. French politics has become extremely polarized. On one side, you have Marine Le Pen and the far right promising to close borders and protect French workers. On the other side, you have Jean-Luc Mélenchon and the far left promising to tax the rich even more and expand social programs. In the middle, you have Macron trying to push through reforms that everyone hates, but that are necessary to prevent total collapse. The result is paralysis. Nobody can agree on solutions, so problems just keep getting worse while politicians fight and point fingers. Immigration has become a flashpoint in French politics and economics. France has accepted millions of immigrants over the past few decades, many from former French colonies in Africa and the Middle East. Integration has been difficult. Unemployment among immigrants is much higher than among native French citizens. This creates social tensions and puts additional strain on social services. At the same time, France's aging population actually needs immigrants to fill jobs and pay into the tax system. It's a complex problem with no easy answers, but instead of thoughtful debate, it mostly generates angry shouting matches. The big cities versus the countryside divide is tearing France apart. Paris and a few other major cities are relatively prosperous, with jobs in tech, finance, and tourism. But rural France is dying. Small towns are losing population as young people move away for work. Local services are disappearing. Hospitals close. Train service gets cut. The people left behind feel forgotten and angry. They see their taxes going to support programs in cities while their own communities crumble. This geographic inequality is getting worse every year, and it's fueling political extremism on both ends of the spectrum. French competitiveness on the global stage is declining. 30 years ago, France was a powerhouse in aerospace, automotive, telecommunications, and luxury goods. Today, French companies are losing ground to competitors from Asia, the United States, and even other European countries. Airbus is still strong, but it's a European consortium, not purely French. Renault and Peugeot are struggling against Toyota, Tesla, and Chinese electric vehicle makers. In tech, France has produced almost no companies that can compete with American or Chinese giants. The rigid French business environment makes it hard for new companies to grow, and for existing companies to adapt quickly to changing markets. The currency situation is both a blessing and a curse for France. Being part of the euro means France can't devalue its currency to make exports cheaper and boost growth. Countries like the United Kingdom or the United States can use monetary policy to help their economies. France gave up that tool when it joined the euro. On the flip side, the euro gives France access to cheap borrowing because Germany's strong economy props up the currency. If France still had the franc, investors would demand much higher interest rates to lend money to a country with such terrible finances. So the euro is a crutch that allows France to delay hard choices. Climate policy is adding another layer of costs to the French economy. France has committed to aggressive carbon reduction targets. This means closing coal plants, investing in renewables, and making buildings more energy efficient. All of this costs money, lots of money. The government is spending billions on green initiatives while simultaneously cutting budgets for other programs. French companies face stricter environmental regulations than competitors in other countries, which raises their costs. Again, these might be necessary policies for the planet, but they make France's economic situation even more difficult in the short term. The financial sector in France is another weak point. French banks hold massive amounts of government debt, not just from France but from other weak European countries too. If any of these governments run into trouble, French banks could face huge losses. We saw this during the Greek debt crisis when French banks had to write off billions in bad loans. The banks survived that time because the European Central Bank stepped in. But what happens if the crisis is bigger next time? What if Italy or Spain faces default? French banks could be on the hook for losses that would make 2008 look small. Tourism is one of the few bright spots in the French economy. France is the most visited country in the world, with about 90 million tourists each year. Tourism brings in roughly 60 billion euros annually. But even this sector faces challenges. Strikes and protests disrupt travel. Hotels and restaurants struggle to find workers because wages are low and costs of living are high. Climate change threatens ski resorts in the Alps and beaches in the south. And after COVID, tourism patterns have changed. People are taking shorter trips and spending less money. France can't count on tourism alone to save its economy. Let's talk about what happens if France doesn't fix these problems. The optimistic scenario is slow decline. Growth stays low, around 1% per year. Unemployment stays high. Young people keep leaving. The social safety net slowly erodes as the government cuts spending bit by bit. France becomes less important on the world stage. Quality of life declines gradually over decades. This is the best-case scenario, a slow fade into irrelevance. The pessimistic scenario is much scarier. At some point, investors lose confidence in France's ability to pay its debts. Interest rates spike. The government can't borrow money anymore. They're forced to make massive cuts to pensions, healthcare, and public services all at once. Unemployment soars. Social unrest explodes. The far right or far left takes power with promises to fix everything. They either try to leave the euro, which would be economically catastrophic, or they implement policies that make things even worse. Other European countries face contagion as the crisis spreads. The entire European Union could unravel. Some economists think France still has time to fix things. They point to France's educated workforce, strong infrastructure, and cultural assets. If the government can push through real labor market reforms, reduce regulations, and bring spending under control, France could turn things around. The tax burden needs to come down to stop the brain drain. The retirement age needs to rise more. Public sector efficiency needs to improve. These changes are possible in theory, but they require political will and public acceptance that hasn't materialized yet. Other economists are much more pessimistic. They argue that France is caught in a trap with no good way out. The population won't accept cuts to benefits they've been promised. The wealthy are already leaving. The productive economy is shrinking. Demographics are destiny, and France's demographics are terrible. Short of a massive baby boom or a sudden surge in productivity from new technology, the math just doesn't work. These pessimists think France is headed for a crisis within the next 10 years, maybe sooner. What should regular people take away from all this? If you're French, the message is uncomfortable but clear. The social model you grew up with is ending. Your generation will probably work longer, pay more, and receive less than your parents did. If you have valuable skills, you might want to consider opportunities in other countries. If you're an investor, French assets look risky. The government might default on bonds or implement wealth taxes that grab your money. If you're American or from another country, pay attention because this is a warning. Generous social programs sound wonderful, but somebody has to pay for them. If the math doesn't add up, promising more benefits just digs the hole deeper. The story of France is the story of a country that made promises it couldn't keep. They promised security, prosperity, and protection to everyone. For a while, during the golden years after World War II, it seemed possible. But times changed. The world became more competitive. The population aged. The old formulas stopped working. Instead of adapting, French politicians kept promising more while the foundations crumbled underneath. Now the bill is coming due, and nobody wants to pay it. That's the economic truth about France that most people don't want to face. It's not about being poor in absolute terms. French people still live better than most of the world. It's about the trajectory, the direction things are heading. And right now, that direction is down unless something dramatic changes. The clock is ticking, and the financial time bomb I mentioned at the start is getting closer to zero. When it goes off, we'll all feel the blast.